the Mahabharata of Krishna-Dwaipayana Vyasa. Translated into English prose from the original Sanskrit text by Pratap Chandra Roy C.I.E. This free ebook has been downloaded from holybooks.com. Vana Parva. Section 207, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, the pious fowler, O Yudhishthira, then said to that Brahmana, undoubtedly my deeds are very cruel, but, O Brahmana, destiny is all-powerful and it is difficult to evade the consequence of our past actions. And this is the karmic evil arising out of sin committed in a former life. But, O Brahmana, I am always assiduous in eradicating the evil. The deity takes away life, the executioner acts only as a secondary agent. And we, O good Brahmana, are only such agents in regard to our karma. Those animals that are slain by me and whose meat I sell, also acquire karma, because with their meat, gods and guests and servants are regaled with dainty food and the manes are propitiated. It is said authoritatively that herbs and vegetables, deer, birds and wild animals constitute the food of all creatures. And, O Brahmana, King Sivi, the son of Usinara, of great forbearance attained to heaven, which is hard to reach, giving away his own flesh. And in days of yore, O Brahmana, 2,000 animals used to be killed every day in the kitchen of King Rantideva, and in the same manner 2,000 cows were killed every day, and, O best of regenerate beings, King Rantideva acquired unrivaled reputation by distributing food with meat every day. For the performance of the 4 monthly rites animals ought to be sacrificed daily. The sacred fire is fond of animal food, this saying has come down to us. And at sacrifices animals are invariably killed by regenerate Brahmanas, and these animals being purged of sin, by incantation of hymns, go to heaven. If, O Brahmana, the sacred fire had not been so fond of animal food in ancient times, it could never have become the food of anyone. And in this matter of animal food, this rule has been laid down by Munis: whoever partakes of animal food after having first offered it duly and respectfully to the gods and the manes, is not polluted by the act. And such a man is not at all considered to have partaken of animal food, even as a brahmacharin having intercourse with his wife during the menstrual period, is nevertheless considered to be a good Brahmana. After consideration of the propriety and impropriety of the matter, this rule has been laid down. King Sodasa, O Brahmana, when under a curse, often used to prey upon men, what is thy opinion of this matter? And, O good Brahmana, knowing this to be the consequence of my own actions, I obtain my livelihood from this profession. The forsaking of one's own occupation is considered, O Brahmana, to be a sin, and the act of sticking to one's own profession is without doubt a meritorious act. The karma of a former existence never forsakes any creature. And in determining the various consequences of one's karma, this rule was not lost sight of by the Creator. A person having his being under the influence of evil karma, must always consider how he can atone for his karma, and extricate himself from an evil doom, and the evil karma may be expiated in various ways. Accordingly, O good Brahmana, I am charitable, truthful, assiduous in attending on my superior, full of respect towards regenerate Brahmanas, devoted to and free from pride and idle excessive talk. Agriculture is considered to be a praiseworthy occupation, but it is well known that even there, great harm is done to animal life, and in the operation of digging the earth with the plough, numberless creatures lurking in the ground as also various other forms of animal life are destroyed. Dost thou not think so? O good Brahmana, Vrihi and other seeds of rice are all living organisms. What is thy opinion on this matter? Men, O Brahmana, hunt wild animals and kill them and partake of their meat, they also cut up trees and herbs, but, O Brahmana, there are numberless living organisms in trees, in fruits, as also in water. Dost thou not think so? This whole creation, O Brahmana, is full of animal life, sustaining itself with food derived from living organisms. Dost thou not mark that fish prey upon fish, and that various species of animals prey upon other species, and there are species the members of which prey upon each other? Men, O Brahmana, while walking about hither and thither, kill numberless creatures lurking in the ground by trampling on them, and even men of wisdom and enlightenment destroy animal life in various ways, even while sleeping or reposing themselves. What hast thou to say to this? The earth and the air all swarm with living organisms, which are unconsciously destroyed by men from mere ignorance. Is not this so? The commandment that people should not do harm to any creature, was ordained of old by men, who were ignorant of the true facts of the case. For, O Brahmana, there is not a man on the face of this earth, who is free from the sin of doing injury to creatures. After full consideration, the conclusion is irresistible that there is not a single man who is free from the sin of doing injury to animal life. Even the sage, O good Brahmana, whose vow is to do harm to no creature, doth inflict injury to animal life. Only, on account of greater heedfulness, the harm is less. Men of noble birth and great qualities perpetrate wicked acts in defiance of all, of which they are not at all ashamed. Good men acting in an exemplary way are not commended by other good men, nor are bad men acting in a contrary way praised by their wicked compeers, and friends are not agreeable to friends, albeit endowed with high qualities, and foolish pedantic men cry down the virtues of their preceptors. This reversal of the natural order of things, O good Brahmana, is seen everywhere in this world. What is thy opinion as to the virtuousness or otherwise of this state of things? There is much that can be said of the goodness or badness of our actions. But whoever is addicted to his own proper occupation surely acquires great reputation. Thus ends the 207th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 208, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, O Yudhishthira, the virtuous fowler, eminent in pity, then skillfully addressed himself again to that foremost of Brahmanas, saying, It is the dictum of the aged that the ways of righteousness are subtle, diverse and infinite. When life is at stake and in the matter of marriage, it is proper to tell an untruth. Untruth sometimes leads to the triumph of truth, and the latter dwindles into untruth. Whichever conduces most to the good of all creatures is considered to be truth. Virtue is thus perverted, mark thou its subtle ways. O best of virtuous men, man's actions are either good or bad, and he undoubtedly reaps their fruits. The ignorant man, having attained to an abject state, grossly abuses the gods, not knowing that it is the consequence of his own evil, karma. The foolish, the designing and the fickle, O good Brahmana, always attain the very reverse of happiness or misery. Neither learning nor good morals, nor personal exertion can save them. And if the fruits of our exertion were not dependent on anything else, people would attain the object of their desire, by simply striving to attain it. It is seen that able, intelligent and diligent persons are baffled in their efforts, and do not attain the fruits of their actions. On the other hand, persons who are always active in injuring others and in practicing deception on the world, lead a happy life. There are some who attain prosperity without any exertion. And there are others, who with the utmost exertion, are unable to achieve their dues. Miserly persons with the object of having sons born to them worship the gods, and practice severe austerities, and those sons having remained in the womb for 10 months at length turn out to be very infamous issue of their race, and others begotten under the same auspices, decently pass their lives in luxury with heaps of riches and grain accumulated by their ancestors. the diseases from which men suffer, are undoubtedly the result of their own karma. They then behave like small deer at the hands of hunters, and they are racked with mental troubles. And, O Brahmana, as hunters intercept the flight of their game, the progress of those diseases is checked by able and skillful physicians with their collections of drugs. And, the best of the cherishers of religion, thou hast observed that those who have it in their power to enjoy the good things of this earth, are prevented from doing so from the fact of their suffering from chronic bowel complaints, and that many others that are strong and powerful, suffer from misery, and are enabled with great difficulty to obtain a livelihood, and that every man is thus helpless, overcome by misery and illusion, and again tossed and overpowered by the powerful current of his own actions, karma. If there were absolute freedom of action, no creature would die, none would be subject to decay, or await his evil doom, and everybody would attain the object of his desire. All persons desire to outdistance their neighbors in the race of life, and they strive to do so to the utmost of their power, but the result turns out otherwise. Many are the persons born under the influence of the same star and the same auspices of good luck, but a great diversity is observable in the maturity of their actions. No person, O good Brahmana, can be the dispenser of his own lot. The actions done in a previous existence are seen to fructify in our present life. It is the immemorial tradition that the soul is eternal and everlasting, but the corporeal frame of all creatures is subject to destruction here below. When therefore life is extinguished, the body only is destroyed, but the spirit, wedded to its actions, travels elsewhere. The Brahmana replied, O best of those versed in the doctrine of karma, and in the delivery of discourses, I long to know accurately how the soul becomes eternal. The fowler replied, the spirit dies not, there being simply a change of tenement. They are mistaken, who foolishly say that all creatures die. The soul betakes itself to another frame, and its change of habitation is called its death. In the world of men, no man reaps the consequences of another man's karma. Whatever one does, he is sure to reap the consequences thereof, for the consequences of the karma that is once done, can never be obviated. The virtuous become endowed with great virtues, and sinful men become the perpetrators of wicked deeds. Men's actions follow them, and influenced by these, they are born again. The Brahmana inquired, why does the spirit take its birth, and why does its nativity become sinful or virtuous, and how, O good man, does it come to belong to a sinful or virtuous race? The fowler replied, this mystery seems to belong to the subject of procreation, but I shall briefly describe to you, O good Brahmana, how the spirit is born again with its accumulated load of karma, the righteous in a virtuous, and the wicked in a sinful nativity. By the performance of virtuous actions it attains to the state of the gods, and by a combination of good and evil, it acquires the human state. By indulgence in sensuality and similar demoralizing practices it is born in the lower species of animals, and by sinful acts, it goes to the infernal regions. Afflicted with the miseries of birth and dotage, man is fated to rot here below from the evil consequences of his own actions. Passing through thousands of births as also the infernal regions, our spirits wander about, secured by the fetters of their own karma. Animate beings become miserable in the next world on account of these actions done by themselves, and from the reaction of those miseries, they assume lower births and then they accumulate a new series of actions, and they consequently suffer misery over again, like sickly men partaking of unwholesome food, and although they are thus afflicted, they consider themselves to be happy and at ease, and consequently their fetters are not loosened and new karma arises, and suffering from divers miseries they turn about in this world like a wheel. If casting off their fetters they purify themselves by their actions and practice austerities and religious meditations, then, O best of Brahmanas, they attain the Elysian regions by these numerous acts, and by casting off their fetters and by the purification of karma, men attain those blissful regions where misery is unknown to those who go there. The sinful man who is addicted to vices, never comes to the end of his course of iniquities. Therefore must we strive to do what is virtuous and forbear from doing what is unrighteous. Whoever with a heart full of gratefulness and free from malice strives to do what is good, attains wealth, virtue, happiness and heaven hereafter. Those who are purified of sins, wise, forbearing, constant in righteousness and self-restrained, enjoy continuous felicity in this as well as in the next world. Man must follow the standard of virtue of the good, and in his acts imitate the example of the righteous. There are virtuous men, versed in holy writ and learned in all departments of knowledge. Man's proper duty consists in following his own proper avocation, and this being the case, these latter do not become confused and mixed up. The wise man delights in virtue and lives by righteousness. And, O good Brahmana, such a man with the wealth of righteousness which he hereby acquires, waters the root of the plant in which he finds most virtue. The virtuous man acts thus and his mind is calmed. He is pleased with his friends in this world, and he also attains happiness hereafter. Virtuous people, O good man, acquire dominion over all and the pleasure of beauty, flavor, sound and touch according to their desire. These are known to be the rewards of virtue. But the man of enlightened vision, O great Brahmana, is not satisfied with reaping the fruits of righteousness. Not content with that, he with the light of spiritual wisdom that is in him, becomes indifferent to pain and pleasure, and the vice of the world influences him not. Of his own free will he becometh indifferent to worldly pursuits, but he forsaketh not virtue. Observing that everything worldly is evanescent, he tried to renounce everything, and counting on more chance he devised means for the attainment of salvation. Thus doth he renounce the pursuits of the world, shunneth the ways of sin, becometh virtuous and at last attaineth salvation. Spiritual wisdom is the prime requisite of men for salvation, resignation and forbearance are its roots. By this means he attaineth all the objects of this desire. But subduing the senses and by means of truthfulness and forbearance, he attaineth, O good Brahmana, the supreme asylum of Brahma. The Brahmana again inquired, O thou most eminent in virtue and constant in the performance of the religious obligations, you talk of senses, what are they, how may they be subdued, and what is the good of subduing them, and how doth a creature reap the fruits thereof? O pious man, I beg to acquaint myself with the truth of this matter. Thus ends the 209th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 209, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, Here, O King Yudhishthira, what the virtuous fowler, thus interrogated by that Brahmana, said to him in reply. The fowler said, Men's minds are at first bent on the acquisition of knowledge. That acquired, O good Brahmana, they indulge in their passions and desires, and for that end, they labor and set about tasks of great magnitude and indulge in much desired pleasures of beauty, flavor, etc. Then follows fondness, then envy, then avarice and then extinction of all spiritual light. And when men are thus influenced by avarice, and overcome by envy and fondness, their intellect ceases to be guided by righteousness and they practice the very mockery of virtue. Practicing virtue with hypocrisy, they are content to acquire wealth by dishonorable means. With the wealth thus acquired, the intelligent principle in them becomes enamored of those evil ways, and they are filled with a desire to commit sins. And when, O good Brahmana, their friends and men of wisdom remonstrate with them, they are ready with specious answers, which are neither sound nor convincing. From their being addicted to evil ways, they are guilty of a threefold sin. They commit sin in thought, in word, as also in action. They being addicted to wicked ways, all their good qualities die out, and these men of wicked deeds cultivate the friendship of men of similar character, and consequently they suffer misery in this world as well as in the next. The sinful man is of this nature, and now hear of the man of virtue. He discerns these evils by means of his spiritual insight, and is able to discriminate between happiness and misery, and is full of respectful attention to men of virtue, and from practicing virtues, his mind becomes inclined to righteousness. The Brahmana replied, "Thou hast given a true exposition of religion which none else is able to expound. Thy spiritual power is great, and thou dost appear to me to be like a great rishi." The fowler replied, "The great Brahmanas are worshipped with the same honors as our ancestors, and they are always propitiated with offerings of food before others. Wise men in this world do what is pleasing to them, with all their heart. And I shall, O good Brahmana, describe to thee what is pleasing to them, after having bowed down to Brahmanas as a class. Do thou learn from me the Brahmanic philosophy. This whole universe, unconquerable everywhere and abounding in great elements, is Brahma. And there is nothing higher than this. The earth, air, water, fire and sky are the great elements. And form, odor, sound, touch and taste are their characteristic properties. These latter two have their properties which are also correlated to each other. And of the three qualities which are gradually characterized by each in order of priority, is consciousness, which is called the mind. The seventh is intelligence, and after that comes egoism, and then the five senses, then the soul, then the moral qualities called Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. These 17 are said to be the unknown or incomprehensible qualities. I have described all this to thee, what else dost thou wish to know? Thus ends the 210th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 210, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, O Bharata, the Brahmana, thus interrogated by the virtuous fowler, resumed again this discourse so pleasing to the mind. The Brahmana said, O best of the cherishers of religion, it is said that there are 5 great elements. Do thou describe to me in full the properties of any one of the 5. The fowler replied, The earth, water, fire, air and sky all have properties interlapping each other. I shall describe them to thee. The earth, O Brahmana, has 5 qualities, water 4, fire 3 and the air and sky together 3 also. Sound, touch, form, odor and taste, these 5 qualities belong to earth, and sound, touch, form and taste, O austere Brahmana, have been described to thee as the properties of water, and sound, touch and form are the 3 properties of fire, and air has 2 properties, sound and touch, and sound is the property of sky. And, O Brahmana, these 15 properties inherent in 5 elements, exist in all substances of which this universe is composed. And they are not opposed to one another, they exist, O Brahmana, in proper combination. When this whole universe is thrown into a state of confusion, then every corporeal being in the fullness of time, assumes another corpus. It arises and perishes in due order. And there are present the 5 elementary substances of which all the mobile and immobile world is composed. Whatever is perceptible by the senses, is called Vyakta, knowable, or comprehensible, and whatever is beyond the reach of the senses and can only be perceived by guesses, is known to be Avyakta, not Vyakta. When a person engages in the discipline of self-examination, after having subdued the senses which have of their own proper objective play in the external conditions of sound, form, etc., then he beholds his own spirit pervading the universe, and the universe reflected in itself. He who is wedded to his previous karma, although skilled in the highest spiritual wisdom, is cognizant only of his soul's objective existence, but the person whose soul is never affected by the objective conditions around, is never subject to ills, owing to its absorption in the elementary spirit of Brahma. When a person has overcome the domination of illusion, his manly virtues consisting of the essence of spiritual wisdom, turn to the spiritual enlightenment which illumines the intelligence of sentient beings. Such a person is styled by the omnipotent, intelligent spirit as one who is without beginning and without end, self-existent, immutable, incorporeal and incomparable. This, O Brahmana, that thou hast enquired of me is only the result of self-discipline, and this self-discipline can only be acquired by subduing the senses. It cannot be otherwise. Heaven and hell are both dependent on our senses. When subdued, they lead to heaven; when indulged in, they lead to perdition. This subjugation of the senses is the highest means of attaining spiritual light. Our senses are at the cause root of our spiritual advancement as also at the root of our spiritual degradation. By indulging in them, a person undoubtedly contracts vices, and by subduing these, he attains salvation. The self-restrained person who acquires mastery over the six senses inherent in our nature, is never tainted with sin, and consequently evil has no power over him. Man's corporeal self has been compared to a chariot, his soul to a charioteer and his senses to horses. A dexterous man drives about without confusion, like a quiet charioteer with well-broken horses. That man is an excellent driver, who knows how to patiently wield the reins of those wild horses, the six senses inherent in our nature. When our senses become ungovernable like horses on the high road, we must patiently rein them in, for with patience, we are sure to get the better of them. When a man's mind is overpowered by any one of these senses running wild, he loses his reason, and becomes like a ship tossed by storms upon the high ocean. Men are deceived by illusion in hoping to reap the fruits of those six things, whose effects are studied by persons of spiritual insight, who thereby reap the fruits of their clear perception. Thus ends the 210th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 211, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, O Bharata, the fowler having expounded these abstruse points, the Brahmana with great attention again inquired of him about these subtle topics. The Brahmana said, Do thou truly describe to me, who now duly ask thee, the respective virtues of the qualities of Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. The fowler replied, Very well, I shall tell thee what thou hast asked. I shall describe separately their respective virtues, do thou listen. Of them Tamas is characterized by illusion spiritual, Rajas incites men to action, Sattva is of great grandeur, and on that account, it is said to be the greatest of them. He who is greatly under the influence of spiritual ignorance, who is foolish, senseless and given to dreaming, who is idle, unenergetic and swayed by anger and haughtiness, is said to be under the influence of Tamas. And, O Brahmana Rishi, that excellent man who is agreeable in speech, thoughtful, free from envy, industrious in action from an eager desire to reap its fruits, and of warm temperament, is said to be under the influence of Rajas. And he who is resolute, patient, not subject to anger, free from malice, and is not skillful in action from want of a selfish desire to reap its fruits, wise and forbearing, is said to be under the influence of Sattva. When a man endowed with the Sattva quality, is influenced by worldliness, he suffers misery, but he hates worldliness, when he realizes its full significance. And then a feeling of indifference to worldly affairs begins to influence him. And then his pride decreases, and uprightness becomes more prominent, and his conflicting moral sentiments are reconciled. And then self-restraint in any matter becomes unnecessary. A man, O Brahmana, may be born in the Sudra caste, but if he is possessed of good qualities, he may attain the state of Vaisya and similarly that of a Kshatriya, and if he is steadfast in rectitude, he may even become a Brahmana. I have described to thee these virtues, what else dost thou wish to learn? Thus ends the 211th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 212, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. The Brahmana inquired, how is it that fire, vital force, in combination with the earthly element, matter, becomes the corporeal tenement of living creatures, and how doth the vital air, the breath of life, according to the nature of its seat, the muscles and nerves, excite to action the corporeal frame? Markandeya said, this question, O Yudhishthira, having been put to the Brahmana by the fowler, the latter, in reply, said to that high-minded Brahmana. The fowler said, the vital spirit manifesting itself in the seat of consciousness, causes the action of the corporeal frame. And the soul being present in both of them acts through them. The past, the present and the future are inseparably associated with the soul. And it is the highest of a creature's possessions, it is of the essence of the Supreme Spirit and we adore it. It is the animating principle of all creatures, and it is the eternal Purusha spirit. It is great and it is the intelligence and the ego, and it is the subjective seat of the various properties of elements. Thus while seated here in a corporeal frame it is sustained in all its relations external or internal to matter or mind by the subtle ethereal air called prana, and thereafter, each creature goes its own way by the action of another subtle air called samana. And this latter transforming itself into apana air, and supported by the head of the stomach carries the refuse matter of the body, urine, etc., to the kidneys and intestines. That same air is present in the three elements of effort, exertion and power, and in that condition it is called udana air by persons learned in physical science, and when manifesting itself by its presence at all the junctional points of the human system, it is known by the name Vyana. And the internal heat is diffused over all the tissues of our system, and supported by these kinds of air, it transforms our food and the tissues and the humors of our system. And by the coalition of prana and other airs, a reaction, combination, ensues, and the heat generated thereby is known as the internal heat of the human system, which causes the digestion of our food. The prana and the apana air are interposed within the samana and the udana air, and the heat generated by their coalition causes the growth of the body, consisting of the 7 substances, bones, muscles, etc. And that portion of its seat extending to as far as the rectum is called apana, and from that arteries arise in the 5 airs prana, etc. The prana air, acted on by the heat strikes against the extremity of the apana region and then recoiling, it reacts on the heat. Above the navel is the region of undigested food and below it the region of digestion. And the prana and all other airs of the system are seated in the navel. The arteries issuing from the heart run upwards and downwards, as also in oblique directions, they carry the best essence of our food, and are acted upon by the 10 prana airs. This is the way by which patient yogins who have overcome all difficulties, and who view things with an impartial and equal eye, with their souls seated in the brain, find the Supreme Spirit. The prana and the apana airs are thus present in the body of all creatures. Know that the spirit is embodied in corporeal disguise, in the 11 allotropous conditions of the animal system, and that though eternal, its normal state is apparently modified by its accompaniments, even like the fire purified in its pan, eternal, yet with its course altered by its surroundings, and that the divine thing which is kindred with the body is related to the latter in the same way as a drop of water to the sleek surface of a lotus leaf on which it rolls. Know that sattva, rajas and tamas, are the attributes of all life and that life is the attribute of spirit, and that the latter again is an attribute of the Supreme Spirit. Inert, insensible matter is the seat of the living principle, which is active in itself and induces activity in others. That thing by which the seven worlds are incited to action is called the Most High by men of high spiritual insight. Thus in all these elements, the eternal spirit does not show itself, but is perceived by the learned in spiritual science by reason of their high and keen perception. A pure-minded person, by purification of his heart, is able to destroy the good and evil effect of his actions and attains eternal beatitude by the enlightenment of his inward spirit. That state of peace and purification of heart is likened to the state of a person who in a cheerful state of mind sleeps soundly, or the brilliance of a lamp trimmed by a skillful hand. Such a pure-minded person living on spare diet perceives the Supreme Spirit reflected in his own, and by practicing concentration of mind in the evening and small hours of the night, he beholds the Supreme Spirit which has no attributes, in the light of his heart, shining like a dazzling lamp, and thus he attains salvation. Avarice and anger must be subdued by all means, for this act constitutes the most sacred virtue that people can practice and is considered to be the means by which men can cross over to the other side of this sea of affliction and trouble. A man must preserve his righteousness from being overcome by the evil consequences of anger, his virtues from the effects of pride, his learning from the effects of vanity, and his own spirit from illusion. Leniency is the best of virtues, and forbearance is the best of powers. The knowledge of our spiritual nature is the best of all knowledge, and truthfulness is the best of all religious obligations. The telling of truth is good, and the knowledge of truth may also be good, but what conduces to the greatest good of all creatures, is known as the highest truth. He whose actions are performed not with the object of securing any reward or blessing, who has sacrificed all to the requirements of his renunciation, is a real sannyasin and is really wise. And as communion with Brahma cannot be taught to us, even by our spiritual preceptor, he only giving us a clue to the mystery renunciation of the material world is called yoga. We must not do harm to any creature and must live in terms of amity with all, and in this our present existence, we must not avenge ourselves on any creature. Self-abnegation, peace of mind, renunciation of hope, and equanimity, these are the ways by which spiritual enlightenment can always be secured, and the knowledge of self, one's own spiritual nature, is the best of all knowledge. In this world as well as hereafter, renouncing all worldly desires and assuming a stoic indifference, wherein all suffering is at rest, people should fulfill their religious duties with the aid of their intelligence. The Muni who desires to obtain moksha, salvation, which is very difficult to attain, must be constant in austerities, forbearing, self-restrained, and must give up that longing fondness which binds him to the things of this earth. They call these the attributes of the Supreme Spirit. The Gunas, qualities or attributes, that we are conscious of, reduce themselves to agunas, non-gunas. In him, he is not bound by anything, and is perceptible only by the expansion and development of our spiritual vision. As soon as the illusion of ignorance is dispelled, this supreme unalloyed beatitude is attained. By foregoing the objects of both pleasure and pain and by renouncing the feelings which bind him to the things of this earth, a man may attain Brahma, Supreme Spirit or salvation. O good Brahmana, I have now briefly explained to thee all this, as I have heard. What else dost thou wish to know? Thus ends the 212th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 213, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya said, when, O Yudhishthira, all this mystery of salvation was explained to that Brahmana, he was highly pleased and he said addressing the fowler, all this that thou hast explained, is rational, and it seems to me that there is nothing in connection with the mysteries of religion which thou dost not know. The fowler replied, O good and great Brahmana, thou shalt perceive with thine own eyes, all the virtue that I lay claim to, and by reason of which I have attained this blissful state. Rise, worshipful sir, and quickly enter this inner apartment. O virtuous man, it is proper that thou shouldst see my father and my mother. Markandeya continued, thus addressed the Brahmana went in, and beheld a fine beautiful mansion. It was a magnificent house divided in 4 suites of rooms, admired by gods and looking like one of their palaces. It was also furnished with seats and beds, and redolent of excellent perfumes. His revered parents, clad in white robes, having finished their meals, were seated at ease. The fowler, beholding them, prostrated himself before them with his head at their feet. His aged parents then addressed him thus, Rise, O man of piety, rise, may righteousness shield thee, we are much pleased with thee for thy piety, mayst thou be blessed with a long life, and with knowledge, high intelligence, and fulfillment of thy desires. Thou art a good and dutiful son, for we are constantly and reasonably looked after by thee, and even amongst the celestials thou hast not another divinity to worship. By constantly subduing thyself, thou hast become endowed with the self-restraining power of Brahmanas, and all thy grandsires and ancestors are constantly pleased with thee for thy self-restraining virtues and for thy piety towards us. In thought, word or deed thy attention to us never flags, and it seems that at present thou hast no other thought in thy mind, save as to how to please us. As Rama, the son of Jamdagni, labored to please his aged parents, so hast thou, O son, done to please us, and even more. Then the fowler introduced the Brahmana to his parents, and they received him with the usual salutation of welcome, and the Brahmana, accepting their welcome, inquired if they, with their children and servants, were all right at home, and if they were always enjoying good health at that time of life. The aged couple replied, At home, O Brahmana, we are all right, with all our servants. Hast thou, adorable sir, reached this place without any difficulty? Markandeya continued, the Brahmana replied, Yes, I have. Then the fowler, addressing himself to the Brahmana, said to him, These my parents, worshipful sir, are the idols that I worship. Whatever is due to the gods, I do unto them. As the 33 gods with Indra at their head are worshipped by men, so are these aged parents of mine worshipped by me. As Brahmanas exert themselves for the purpose of procuring offering for their gods, so do I act with diligence for these 2 idols of mine. These my father and mother, O Brahmana, are my supreme gods, and I seek to please them always with offerings of flowers, fruits and gems. To me they are like the 3 sacred fires mentioned by the learned, and, O Brahmana, they seem to me to be as good as sacrifices or the 4 waves. My 5 life-giving heirs, my wife and children and friends are all for them dedicated to their service. And with my wife and children I always attend on them. O good Brahmana, with my own hands I assist them in bathing and also wash their feet, and give them food, and I say to them only what is agreeable, leaving out what is unpleasant. I consider it to be my highest duty to do what is agreeable to them, even though it be not strictly justifiable. And, O Brahmana, I am always diligent in attending on them. The 2 parents, the sacred fire, the soul and the spiritual preceptor, these 5, O good Brahmana, are worthy of the highest reverence from a person who seeks prosperity. By serving them properly, one acquires the merit of perpetually keeping up the sacred fire. And it is the eternal and invariable duty of all householders. Thus ends the 213th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 214, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. Markandeya continued, the virtuous fowler, having introduced his both parents to that Brahmana as his highest gurus, again spoke to him as follows, Mark thou the power of this virtue of mine, by which my inner spiritual vision is extended. For this, thou wast told by that self-restrained, truthful lady, devoted to her husband, hie thee to Mithila, for there lives a fowler who will explain to thee the mysteries of religion. The Brahmana said, O pious man, so constant in fulfilling thy religious obligations, bethinking myself of what that truthful good-natured lady so true to her husband, hath said, I am convinced that thou art really endowed with every high quality. The fowler replied, I have no doubt, my lord, that what that lady, so faithful to her husband, said to thee about me, was said with full knowledge of the facts. I have, Brahmana, explained to thee all this as a matter of favor. And now, good sir, listen to me. I shall explain what is good for thee. O good Brahmana, of irreproachable character, thou hast wronged thy father and thy mother, for thou hast left home without their permission, for the purpose of learning the Veds. Thou hast not acted properly in this matter, for thy ascetic and aged parents have become entirely blind from grief at thy loss. Do thou return home to console them. May this virtue never forsake thee. Thou art high-minded, of ascetic merit, and always devoted to thy religion, but all these have become useless to thee. Do thou without delay return to console thy parents. Do have some regard for my words and not act otherwise. I tell thee what is good for thee, O Brahmana Rishi, do thou return home this very day. The Brahmana replied, This that thou hast said, is undoubtedly true. Mayst thou, O pious man, attain prosperity, I am much pleased with thee. The fowler said, O Brahmana, as thou practicest with assiduousness those divine, ancient, and eternal virtues which are so difficult of attainment even by pure-minded persons, thou appearest to me like a divine being. Return to the side of thy father and mother and be quick and diligent in honoring thy parents, for I do not know if there is any virtue higher than this. The Brahmana replied, By a piece of singular good luck have I arrived here, and by a piece of similar good luck have I thus been associated with thee. It is very difficult to find out, in our midst, a person who can so well expound the mysteries of religion. There is scarcely one man among thousands, who is well versed in the science of religion. I am very glad, O great man, to have secured thy friendship. Mayst thou be prosperous. I was on the point of falling into hell, but was extricated by thee. It was destined to be so, for thou didst unexpectedly come in my way. And, O great man, as the fallen king Yayati was saved by his virtuous grandsons, daughters' sons, so have I now been saved by thee. According to thy advice, I shall honor my father and my mother, for a man with an impure heart can never expound the mysteries of sin and righteousness. As it is very difficult for a person born in the Sudra class to learn the mysteries of the eternal religion, I do not consider thee to be a Sudra. There must surely be some mystery in connection with this matter. Thou must have attained the Sudra's estate by reason of the fruition of thine own past karma. O magnanimous man, I long to know the truth about this matter. Do thou tell it to me with attention and according to thy own inclination. The fowler replied, O good Brahmana, Brahmanas are worthy of all respect from me. Listen, O sinless one, to this story of a previous existence of mine. O son of an excellent Brahmana, I was formerly a Brahmana, well read in the Veds, and an accomplished student of the Vedangas. Through my own fault I have been degraded to my present state. A certain king accomplished in the science of Dhanaveda, science of archery, was my friend, and from his companionship, O Brahmana, I too became skilled in archery, and one day the king, in company with his ministers and followed by his best warriors, went out on a hunting expedition. He killed a large number of deer near a hermitage. I too, O good Brahmana, discharged a terrible arrow. And a rishi was wounded by that arrow with its head bent out. He fell down upon the ground, and screaming loudly said, "I have harmed no one, what sinful man has done this?" And, my lord, taking him for a deer, I went up to him and found that he was pierced through the body by my arrow. On account of my wicked deed I was sorely grieved in mind. And then I said to that rishi of severe ascetic merit, who was loudly crying, lying upon the ground, "I have done this unwittingly, O rishi," and also this I said to the Muni, "Do thou think it proper to pardon all this transgression?" But, O Brahmana, the rishi, lashing himself into a fury, said to me, "Thou shalt be born as a cruel fowler in the Sudra class." Thus ends the 214th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. Section 215, Markandeya Samasya Parva continued. The fowler continued, "Thus cursed by that rishi, I sought to propitiate him with these words, 'Pardon me, O Muni, I have done this wicked deed unwittingly. It behoves thee to pardon all that. Do thou, worshipful sir, soothe yourself.'" The rishi replied, "The curse that I have pronounced can never be falsified, this is certain. But from kindness towards thee, I shall do thee a favour. Though born in the Sudra class thou shalt remain a pious man, and thou shalt undoubtedly honour thy parents, and by honouring them thou shalt attain great spiritual perfection. Thou shalt also remember the events of thy past life and shalt go to heaven, and on the expiation of this curse, thou shalt again become a Brahmana. O best of men, thus, of old was I cursed by that rishi of severe power, and thus was he propitiated by me. Then, O good Brahmana, I extricated the arrow from his body, and took him into the hermitage, but he was not deprived of his life and recovered. O good Brahmana, I have thus described to thee what happened to me of old, and also how I can go to heaven hereafter." The Brahmana said, "O thou of great intelligence, all men are thus subject to happiness or misery, thou shouldst not therefore grieve for that. In obedience to the customs of thy present race, thou hast pursued these wicked ways, but thou art always devoted to virtue and versed in the ways and mysteries of the world. And, O learned man, these being the duties of thy profession, the stain of evil karma will not attach to thee. And after dwelling here for some little time, thou shalt again become a Brahmana, and even now, I consider thee to be a Brahmana, there is no doubt about this. For the Brahmana who is vain and haughty, who is addicted to vices and wedded to evil and degrading practices, is like a Sudra. On the other hand, I consider a Sudra who is always adorned with these virtues, righteousness, self-restraint, and truthfulness, as a Brahmana. A man becomes a Brahmana by his character, by his own evil karma a man attains an evil and terrible doom. O good man, I believe that sin in thee has now died out. Thou must not grieve for this, for men, like thee who art so virtuous and learned in the ways and mysteries of the world, can have no cause for grief." The fowler replied, "The bodily afflictions should be cured with medicines, and the mental ones with spiritual wisdom. This is the power of knowledge. Knowing this, the wise should not behave like boys. Men of low intelligence are overpowered with grief at the occurrence of something which is not agreeable to them, or non-occurrence of something which is good or much desired. Indeed, all creatures are subject to this characteristic of grief or happiness. It is not merely a single creature or class that is subject to misery. Cognizant of this evil, people quickly mend their ways, and if they perceive it at the very outset they succeed in curing it altogether. Whoever grieves for it, only makes himself uneasy. Those wise men whose knowledge has made them happy and contented, and who are indifferent to happiness and misery alike, are really happy. The wise are always contented and the foolish always discontented. There is no end to discontentment, and contentment is the highest happiness. People who have reached the perfect way, do not grieve, they are always conscious of the final destiny of all creatures. One must not give way to discontent, for it is like a virulent poison. It kills persons of undeveloped intelligence, just as child is killed by an enraged snake. That man has no manliness whose energies have left him, and who is overpowered with perplexity when an occasion for the exercise of vigor presents itself. Our actions are surely followed by their consequences. Whoever merely gives himself up to passive indifference to worldly affairs accomplishes no good. Instead of murmuring, one must try to find out the way by which he can secure exemption from spiritual misery, and the means of salvation found, he must then free himself from sensuality. The man who has attained a high state of spiritual knowledge is always conscious of the great deficiency, instability, of all matter. Such a person, keeping in view the final doom of all, never grieves. I too, O learned man, do not grieve, I stay here in this life biding my time. For this reason, O best of men, I am not perplexed with doubts. The Brahmana said, Thou art wise and high in spiritual knowledge, and vast is thy intelligence. Thou who art versed in holy writ, art content with thy spiritual wisdom. I have no cause to find fault with thee. Adieu, O best of pious men, mayst thou be prosperous, and may righteousness shield thee, and mayst thou be assiduous in the practice of virtue. Markandeya continued, the fowler said to him, Be it so. And the good Brahmana walked round him and then departed. And the Brahmana returning home was duly assiduous in his attention to his old parents. I have thus, O pious Yudhishthira, narrated in detail to thee this history full of moral instruction, which thou, my good son, didst ask me to recite, the virtue of women's devotion to their husbands and that of filial piety. Yudhishthira replied, O most pious Brahmana and best of Munis, thou hast related to me this good and wonderful moral story, and listening to thee, O learned man, my time has glided away like a moment, but, O adorable sir, I am not as yet satiated with hearing this moral discourse. Thus ends the 215th section in the Markandeya Samasya Parva of the Vana Parva. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please like and subscribe to be notified of when new audiobooks are uploaded. Thank you for listening and learning. Shanti.